So I'm going to condense basically an hour and 15 minutes into the next 4 onto one slide, which was on 60 slides. So it's kind of a difficult task. So the first thing we did was we talked about the one question that matters. So someone tell me, what was the one question that matters in this discussion? Oh, perfect. What is the unborn? You see, if you answer that question, you've automatically answered all the others. Remember, if the unborn is not human, no justification for abortion is necessary. Okay? If it's not a human, it's like an appendix or getting your tooth pulled, just do it. But if the unborn is a human being, then no justification for abortion is adequate. Okay? And so you got to bring the discussion back to the one question that matters. And this is the one question that nobody wants to talk about, okay? They'd rather talk about choice. They'd rather talk about unwanted babies or pregnancies, rape and incest, economic hardship, forcing morality, a woman's difficult decision. Those are the things people want to talk about. They don't want to talk about what's the unborn, okay? But that's really the only thing that we need to talk about, because it all depends on what is the unborn. The whole morality of this issue depends on what you're killing. If it's a human being, then it would be immoral. The second thing we did was we went through a little tactic I like to use called trotting out the toddler. Okay, and how this works is when someone gives you a reason for supporting abortion, what you do is you apply that justification to killing a toddler, and you see if it works. And if it doesn't work, if the same justification for killing the unborn doesn't work for killing a toddler, then what they're doing is they're assuming that the unborn is not a human being like a toddler. So here's an example. Let's say someone says, women shouldn't be forced to bring an unwanted child into this world. And we said, well, they're already in the world. But besides that, where do you even start? Well, here's where you start. I got a 2-year-old in front of me. Remember that? I got a 2-year-old in front of me. You're trying out a toddler, an invisible toddler. I have a 2-year-old in front of me, and his parents don't want him anymore. He's unwanted. Nobody wants him. Is it okay for his parents to kill him? What are they going to say? Whoa, 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 you're talking about a 2-year-old. I was talking about a fetus. I was talking about an embryo. This is where you got to get this down. It makes you sound really smart. So that's the question, is an embryo human like a toddler? If it is, then the same justification doesn't work, okay? So let's try out the toddler. The last thing we looked at, and this was a little bit tougher for me, and I think for all of you, was finally we spent the remaining time talking about the use of graphic images in making our pro-life case and restoring meaning to the word abortion. Remember, we use these graphic images to help restore our moral sensibilities about this issue. I said there's 2 reasons, essentially, for using graphic images. One is it's a standard means of moral education, okay? I was at King City last week, and King City Secondary School, and they had Mothers Against Drunk Drivers came in, and all the students had to watch, unless it was too graphic for them, but they wanted them to watch these videos, and they were extremely graphic, and they were true stories. But guess what? They work, right? So it's a standard means of moral education. They use the Humane Society when they do commercials. They use them. Why? Because they want you to react and then respond. And it's the same reason why we would use graphic images of post-abortion images, okay? It's used for the Holocaust. You could just list numerous examples, and we did that. The second reason why we use graphic images is because they work, okay? I gave the illustration of Abby Johnson. She was a former director of Planned Parenthood, one of the facilities. She actually was doing an ultrasound-guided abortion. And when she saw what she saw, she became pro-life, okay? She walked out of there and never came back. and she's written numerous books. She's now a pro-life advocate. The other person was Jane Roe, okay? Her real name's Norma, but she's the famous Roe v. Wade, Roe versus Wade, 1973 decision. She's the woman who kind of sparked this whole thing in the United States. And she's now pro-life because she saw not graphic images, but just she saw the developing embryo, a poster of developing embryo, and she put it all together. So images work. And then finally I said, we finished by talking about Emmett Till. Do you guys remember Emmett Till? And we talked about opening the casket on the abortion issue, okay? Now, I can't go through all this stuff again, but opening the casket on abortion, just like they had an open casket funeral for Emmett Till, and that sparked the civil rights movement in the United States. I think that by the same token, by showing these images, we're going to start a movement, okay, in a similar regard using these images. So that's kind of where we went last time. And if you want to see the video, it's going to be up shortly. I'll let you know when that's up. And the notes are online as well. Okay? So where are we in the course? Well, so far we've established a foundation for the debate. Talked about relativism. That reminds me, some people were asking about some books that I recommended. The one on relativism, and essentially that talk that I gave, a lot of that material is straight out of this book. It's called Relativism. Okay, that's easy to remember. Feet firmly planted in midair. Feet firmly planted in midair. That's what relativism is. It's by two philosophers, Francis Beckwith and Greg Koukl. Greg Koukl is, he's the man, okay? I digest all of his resources like crazy. So relativism, get it. The other one that you need to know, you need to have, it's basically this course. This book's like 200 pages or something, and the 6 hours of material that I put together for this course come from this book and a couple others, but mostly this book. It's called The Case for Life. Case for Life. Scott Klusendorf. Say Klusendorf 5 times fast. That's a tough one. Okay? Scott Klusendorf.
That one's in the resource room, by the way, if anybody wants to.
It is. Oh, perfect. Now, Scott Klusendorf gets a lot of his material from some other academic philosophers, and one of those guys is Francis Beckwith. He co-wrote Relativism, and this is just called Defending Life. It's the same title as the course, okay? This is a little bit heavy, so you got to be ready to, get into this, okay? This is much heavier than Case for Life. And then this one. This is Scott Klusendorf as well. It's called Pro-Life 101. It's really, you could read this in a night, okay? It's basically how to give a presentation. My first presentation on this stuff was like 30 minutes, and it was basically this book, okay? And literally the science argument that I'm making tonight can be made in about 30 seconds, and I got to turn that into an hour. So that's that, and I'm going to talk about the miracle of life a little bit, and there's a DVD. It's got a gentleman named Dr. David Menton, and it's called Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. This might actually be in the Resource Center as well. You can watch it on YouTube. It's on there. It's an unbelievable, you need to watch this. If you have kids, you're going to have kids. It just blows your mind. I'm going to talk about some of those things. So it's called Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. So today we're going to talk about, last time we clarified and restored meaning to the issue. Today's a scientific case. Then we're going to look at the philosophical argument next week. And then the week after, we're going to look at the theological argument. Remember, I said, you can go search the internet. You'll find Christian pro-choice organizations. And their principal arguments are from the Bible. Or maybe from the Bible's silence. They use some scriptures, but then they use the argument that the Bible doesn't speak on abortion. So we're going to talk about all that. And then finally, we're going to wrap it all up by looking at some challenges, and I'll have some closing remarks, okay? Does that sound good? All right, let's get into this. Once a debate is properly centered on the status of the unborn, we need to make our case. Now, up until this point, remember, we haven't really made our case. We've trotted out the toddler, we've restored meaning to this word, and we've got people thinking, okay, what is it? What is it? But we haven't said for sure it's a human being. All we've said was if the unborn is a human being, then whatever, okay? So now we got to prove it's a human being. That's what we're going to do today. Now we went through our moral argument. The argument looks like this. You should be able to say this backwards and forwards, eyes closed even, hands behind the back. Pro-life advocates believe. If someone says, what do you believe as a pro-lifer? You should say that it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being without justification. Abortion, elective abortion, takes a life or kills an innocent human being without justification. Therefore, abortion is wrong. Now, I use the word elective abortion. Some of you may be curious, why do I use the word elective abortion, not just abortion? Well, elective abortion is like abortion on demand, for any reason and for no reason. Go in and have your abortion. And we looked at some of those reasons last day that women have abortions. I have enough kids. I don't want any more kids. I don't have enough money. I don't want to be a single mom. There's a number of these examples. And so elective abortion is really for any reason. We use the word therapeutic abortion when we're referring to an abortion to save the mother's life. Some of you have come to me afterwards and asked, well, what about the case of an ectopic pregnancy or a tubal pregnancy, where the mother's life is in jeopardy? We're going to talk about that actually on the last session. It's a tough moral dilemma, but I think there's some wisdom there, some answers there. And so we're just talking about elective abortion. The mother's life is not in jeopardy, okay? The most common way to get out from under this argument is to deny the second premise of the argument. They'll say, yeah, elective abortion intentionally kills something, but it's not a human being, okay? So they deny it's a human being. That's the first way to get out from under this argument. You need to deny one of the premises if you want to get rid of this conclusion that abortion is wrong. Now, this is common, very common, that people will say, we don't know what it is, or it's not a human being. In fact, I have a video here. I showed the second part of it before. I'm just going to show about 30 seconds. It's Rick Warren, pastor of Saddleback Church I think they're in California. He's the author of Purpose-Driven Life. He's interviewing President Obama. Actually, this is before he became president. And he asked, at what point does a baby get human rights? Let's see here.
Okay, now, let's deal with abortion. 40 million abortions since Roe v. Wade. As a pastor, I have to deal with this all the time. All of the pain and all of the conflicts. I know this is a very complex issue. 40 million abortions. At what point does a baby get human rights, in your view?
Well, I think that whether you're looking at it from a theological perspective or a scientific perspective, answering that question with specificity, is above my pay grade. But let me.
Okay, so and then he goes on, and we've seen what he said after that, actually. And listen, I'm not picking on Obama. Some of you guys might be upset. He's really shown a lot of videos of Obama. I'm showing Obama because Obama's an educated person. Okay, did he go to Harvard? I don't know if he's trained in law. Like, this is not just some guy on the street. This is a smart guy, and he makes a serious blunder here when he says, answering this question is above his pay grade. Okay? In fact, when he says that, he's really saying nobody knows. He said, I think that whether you're looking at this issue from a theological perspective or a scientific perspective, answering this question with specificity is above my pay grade. That's nobody knows. Remember we talked about this last time? If someone says nobody knows, let's assume that that's true, that nobody knows. It's not true, by the way. I'm going to show you that it's not true. We do know. But let's assume it is true. Nobody knows when life begins. Is that an argument for the pro-choice position? Absolutely not. If nobody knows, then it's possible that it is a human being from the moment of conception. And if it's even possible that it's a human being at the moment of conception, then why are we engaging in an act that could possibly kill an innocent human being? We talked about the building, demolishing the building. Here's another one that's often used. Let's say you're hunting, okay? You go hunting with your buddies, and you guys all take your, your spots, you're up in your tree. Hey, the bushes are moving. I don't know if that's a deer or one of my buddies. I'm just gonna pull the trigger. Of course not. That's crazy. If you don't know, you don't shoot. You don't kill. Similarly, if you don't know what it is, President Obama, you don't proceed, okay? All right, so let's help the guy out here by answering the question from science. Many uninformed people choose to argue in this fashion, but I'm going to show you there's a very simple case that can be made. I might take a little bit longer going through it, but you could make the case in a few minutes. So there's a three-step process to this argument. Okay, it's a scientific case arguing for the humanity of the unborn. The first thing is that the unborn is alive. Then we're going to look at the second step. It says the unborn is a separate individual, a distinct individual from the mother. And finally, we'll look at the unborn is a whole being, but not just a being, it is a human being. We know what kind of being it is, okay? Let's start with the first one. The unborn is alive. In fact, there's no period of non-life, okay? This is not like Frankenstein where you have a blob of dead cells or something and then you give it a spark of electricity and it becomes alive, okay? It's in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This is a living sperm cell, a living egg cell coming together and forming a living zygote cell, the first cell that is you. You were once a zygote, okay? And we were just talking about this earlier. I know I'm using these scientific terms and it sounds a little degrading, like, that's a baby, not a fetus. Well, this is just a terminology, okay? And if you go back to the root word, the Latin word or whatever, you'll find out that fetus really just means child, okay? And so I'm not trying to be degrading. I'm just saying this is the scientific terminology. So there's no point. Biologically speaking, the unborn is always alive from the moment of conception, okay? There's no period of non-life. If you consult any elementary school textbook, you'll find that there's actually a criteria for life. And if something is growing biologically, if it reacts to its environment, if it's using energy, if it's made of cells, and if it has the potential to reproduce, then it's alive, okay? We teach elementary school children this. I'm not going too fast for anyone here, right? Another way you know something's alive is that you can kill it. If it can be killed, then you know it was alive. And in fact, abortion kills something. So since something dies in the procedure, that's the problem. It's growing, right? You got to get rid of this thing. And so they go have an abortion procedure which kills it. So, I killed that bug. All right, so it's alive. That was easy, right? Let's get a little more complicated here. The unborn is also a separate individual being. Now, this is a very common response you hear. It actually has a title. It's called the personal autonomy argument. When you're talking with someone, they may give you this argument for the pro-choice position. They'll say, a woman should have the right to do whatever she wants with her own body. This just falls out of the lips of pro-choice people, okay? A woman should have the right to do whatever she wants with her own body, right? Now, there's two problems with that. The first is a woman or a man can't do whatever they want with their own body. That's just false. And second of all, it's not her body, okay? Let's look at those quickly. A woman or a man cannot do whatever they want with their own body. The law restricts what we can do with our own bodies, okay? In fact, it does it all of the time. In particular, the law does this when we use our liberties to harm other valuable human beings. The law will step in, okay? So I can't hop in a Mack truck and start driving down the wrong side of the highway with my body. I can do whatever I want. If I get pulled over, hey, cop, try pulling that one. Or just speed down the highway. I'm doing whatever I want with my own body. You can't give me a ticket. What if I started walking in a crowd, swinging my arms? I can't do it. And so here's the question. If someone says to you, women should have the right to do whatever they want with their own body, what you need to ask is a question. Questions are really important when you're having a discussion with someone. First of all, if you ask questions, you seem interested, and interested is interesting, okay? So you want to ask a lot of questions. In fact, there's a guy named Hugh Hewitt. He says you should ask a half a dozen questions in every conversation. Okay? So the question you need to ask is, when can the law restrict what we do with our bodies? When does the law restrict? We know it does, but when does it restrict? The answer is when we're a threat, when our body is a threat to another valuable human being. And that's precisely what we're talking about. And that leads to the next problem, right? I can do whatever I want with my body, but is it her body? Absolutely not. Think about this for a minute. The unborn has features associated with its own body, like its gender, okay? So, female carrying a male child, well, the male child has male reproductive organs. They're not hers, they're his, okay? And that should seem obvious. The baby can have its own blood type. The baby can has its own central nervous system, has its own brain, has its own heart, has its own heartbeat, has its own, what I would call, genetic fingerprint. What's a genetic fingerprint? Well, a unique genetic fingerprint would be the DNA. You get 23 chromosomes from dad, you get 23 chromosomes from mom. When they come together, the individual has 46 chromosomes. And they're unique unless you have an identical twin. Which, by the way, they have different, this is weird, they have different fingerprints. Same genetic makeup, but literal fingerprints, I'm not talking about genetic, literal fingerprints, identical twins don't have the same fingerprints. Can't figure that one out. So DNA is not everything. So the zygote is different. That first cell is different from all the cells in the woman's body. In fact, you could take her skin cells, you could take any one of her organ cells, and they would have her 46 chromosomes. But if you go to the zygote and you look at their chromosomes, they're different, okay? And so we're not talking about the same body here. We're talking about two different people, two different genetic fingerprints. So the unborn is distinct. They're separate. They're individual, okay? They're alive and they're distinct. But what kind of being are they? Anyways, you know, my wife could go into labor right here. And I'm wondering if it's a boy or a girl. No, I actually know it's a girl, I think. We're 85% sure it's a girl. But what I'm not wondering about is if it's human, right? Some of you guys are looking at me like, yeah, it might not be. I'm human. I wonder what we're having. Is it a puppy or is it no, we know it's a human. Well, one way we know it's a human is because it has a unique, I said unique genetic fingerprint before. Now I'm saying a unique genetic signature. Think of CSI. You guys watch those shows? You know, they go into the lab, they do their thing, and they figure out who the killer is. If you take blood sample or a hair, a forensic scientist can tell you whether you have the hair from a human being or the hair from a dog, a German Shepherd, okay? And the way they can do that is they can look at the unique genetic signature of those creatures. They're different. These are karyotypes from a human being, from a cow, and from a pig. They're different, okay? We know the difference between, those are all the chromosomes, by the way, okay? And they're a little shrunk there, but there you go. It turns out all human beings, and we can look quite different, but all human beings are the same genetically, give or take 0.2%, okay? So all the people groups in all the world, and the difference between any two human beings is 0.2%, okay? And that just goes back to we're all descended from two people, Adam and Eve, okay? We could do a whole talk on that. And let's still go back to that one. I said, we know what we're having, don't we? Well, this goes back to a law called the law of biogenesis. The law of biogenesis states that life only comes from life. This was discovered by or confirmed by Louis Pasteur. Now, it's very interesting. I had a pretty bright set of grade 10s first semester. And this one girl, sat in the back, and she said, well, where'd the first cell come from? If life only comes from life, where did the first cell come from? She was smart. And because she asked the question, I can answer any way I like. And so we had a literal, we used the whole class talking about where did life come from? Can natural explanations explain the information in the DNA molecule? And so on. So life comes from life, but not only life comes from life, like comes from like. And so animals reproduce after their kind. Where have you heard that before? Yeah, someone got it right way back. They produce after their kind. And so dogs produce puppies, and fish guppies, and humans yuppies. I don't know, that's not my joke. I got that from someone else. All right, so this is not news to anyone, okay? And this isn't pro-lifers cherry picking what scientific facts we want to look at. This gentleman, Peter Singer, he's written this book called Practical Ethics. He is in favor of elective abortion. If you read his book, he's in favor of infanticide. He believes that you can kill your newborn child up to 30 days after it's born. Now, here's the thing. He's actually consistent. He doesn't think that the change of location gives you value. He believes you get value from being self-aware. And he knows that a fetus is not self-aware, but a newborn isn't self-aware either. And 30 days, saying they're self-aware at 30 days is pushing it probably closer to birth than it should be. It's probably a few months after. And so he's in favor of infanticide. He's consistent. But he says this. By the way, he's bioethics professor at Princeton University. So, anyone going to send their kids there? He says this: is it possible to give human being a precise meaning? He's answering Obama on this one. He says, we can use it as equivalent to member of the species Homo sapien. Whether a being is a member of a given species is something that can be determined scientifically by an examination of the nature of the chromosomes. Nature of the chromosomes, that's the genetic signature that we just talked about. In the cells of the living organisms. In this sense, there is no doubt that from the first moments of its existence, an embryo conceived from a human sperm and eggs is a human being. And that's the second thing we looked at. That's a law of biogenesis. Human and human make a human. Okay? Peter Singer, despite getting it wrong when it comes to his ideas on infanticide, he gets this right. But don't just take his word for it or my word for it. You cannot find an embryology textbook that says different than what I'm telling you, okay? The Developing Human says this, and this is 2003, very popular textbook. Says, human development begins at fertilization, the process during which a male gamete, that's a sperm, unite with a female gamete, that's a oocyte, ovum, to form a single cell called the zygote. This highly specialized, totally potent cell marks the beginning of each of us as an individual, a unique individual. It goes on to say a zygote is the beginning of a new human being. You can find this everywhere. I got like 10 textbooks. I'll just show a couple more quotes. Development begins with fertilization, the process by which a male gamete, the sperm, and the female gamete, the oocyte, unite to give rise to a zygote. That's in Langman's Medical Embryology. In Keith Moore's book, Before We Are Born, Essentials in Embryology, the zygote, formed by the union of an oocyte and a sperm, is the beginning of a new human being. Okay? We're not reading this out of the Bible. This is in the textbooks. And someone in here, I won't point them out, started a discussion on Facebook last week, and they put our argument on, and the first thing that the pro-choicers, her friends, came out with was, you religious people, you Christians, you're trying to force your morality, you know? Our argument is not based off of theology, although we could make that case and we will. Our argument is based off of science, it's off of philosophy, off of morality. Here's some other textbooks. I won't quote them to you. I have them here, though. We had time to kill, which we don't. You can get some really cool DVDs. I don't recommend National Geographic to everybody, but there's a couple of cool DVDs you may want to consider. One's called In the Womb, and in the womb, National Geographic, they say, the two cells gradually and gracefully become one. This is the moment of conception when an individual's unique set of DNA is created, a human signature that never existed before and will never be repeated. In the biology of prenatal development, it says, biologically speaking, human development begins at fertilization. Now, I thought, because I have actually taught reproduction, this was a number of years ago when it was in the grade 9 curriculum, I wanted to actually talk about reproduction in here as an argument for God's handiwork. Literally, I want to show you some of the really cool design features. Like, reproduction would be impossible from an evolutionary perspective. And I want to demonstrate that to you now. So don't be alarmed when you see a uterus on the screen, okay? You guys are shocked. So on the screen, we have a uterus. We have, coming out from the side, these are called oviducts. It's a fancy term for egg tubes, fallopian tubes. They come down and grab what look like kind of water wings on the side. Those are ovaries, okay? And the ovaries are what produce the eggs. In fact, that's what ovary means. Produces the eggs. And so the fallopian tubes come down and they actually have like finger-like processes. They come out and they grab the ovaries there. So let's start talking about ovulation for a second. Every 28 days, a woman releases an egg, sometimes more than one egg, and they actually take turns. Ovary releases an egg, next month, this one releases. Then this one, they're courteous. And if one gets damaged, guess what? Your body knows to start releasing one every month from the one working ovary. So let's talk about that first miracle. Here's the first miracle. When an egg is released from a fallopian tube, it releases, the fallopian tube doesn't know where it's going to be released. It could be released anywhere on the ovary. What happens is the fallopian tube with those finger-like processes will actually feel around and grabs the egg. Now here you have the follicle. The egg actually develops in a follicle inside the ovary. And what happens is mostly follicle here. The egg gets ejected out, gets thrown out. Now this is cool. What happens is if it gets ejected and it doesn't go into the oviduct, we're in big trouble, okay? For one, you could, if it got fertilized, it could create an ectopic pregnancy. This happens, where it grows inside the abdomen, okay? Inside that abdominal cavity, I should say. Now, so you need to get it into the fallopian tube, which is eventually going to go to the uterus. That's going to make the baby, okay? Whereas the baby's going to implant. And so you got to have that right there on the ovary. Well, it's kind of like this. It's kind of like if, you have a pitcher and a back catcher. Have you been to a baseball game? And the catcher doesn't want to miss the ball. So he walks out to the pitcher and he puts his glove onto the pitcher's hand and says, pitch it. I think I can catch this one. Okay? Because if you miss it, this is going to be the end of life. You need to get this right. And so it turns out this happens. You guys aren't impressed yet. So I got to go further. I got to impress you guys. All right, let's keep going. So after the egg is released, supposing it's not fertilized, there's this little thing. It's yellow here. The follicle actually starts to break down, and it turns into what's called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum, it's Latin. It just means yellow body, but if I just said yellow body, you guys wouldn't think I'm very smart. So corpus luteum starts to break down here. Now, this is bad news for the ladies. It's actually bad news for humanity because the corpus luteum, you can actually see it. It becomes a large scar. The ovary is about the size of an almond without the shell. If you hold it at arm's length from you, you would actually be able to see, without a microscope, the scar on the ovary produced from this corpus luteum. Now imagine the next month goes by and the egg's not fertilized. You get another scar, good sized scar. And then the next month goes by. After 4 or 5 months, the ovary is nothing but scar tissue and no longer produces eggs. And that's the end of life. And there's no such thing as humans, or mammals for that matter. But that's not the issue. In fact, what we need is a little bit of a miracle. We need a scar that's produced that actually dissolves. Now, how many of you guys have scars? And are they going to go away? Like, have you kind of settled with the fact that you're going to have that scar till you die? Yeah, that's because it's a tissue mass that you will have. A scar is the connective tissue isn't lined up anymore, and this mass forms, so you have a scar. The one place in the human body, and it's in females, in the ovary, the scar actually gets broken down. It's an absolute miracle. And so they can keep producing eggs every month, and there's not a problem, okay? So that would be the end of life, but still, you guys are not impressed. So let's keep going. I'll impress you before the night's over. All right, so you guys know how this works. You got to get the sperm and egg together so you can fertilize the egg to get the zygote, to get life created, human life created. And so the sperm's going to go, the egg's going to go one way from the ovary. The sperm goes the other way. They meet in about the first third of the oviduct, the fallopian tube, inside there. Now, here's the thing. You're probably thinking, well, I can imagine how the sperm gets out. They got that tail, the flagella. Well, it turns out that's not how they get into the fallopian tube. They actually get there through the musculature of the uterus. Even if the tail doesn't work, it'll still get there. So you got the musculature sending the sperm one way, but how do you get the egg the other way down the oviduct? Well, absolute miracle. Check this out, all right? There's actually these things called cilia. They're like little hairs, and they line the inside of the fallopian tube. And they move, and they push the egg down the fallopian tube. Now, you're probably thinking, well, how do they do that? Do they all just start going? That wouldn't move anything. Oh, you're probably thinking, I know how it works. They all kind of go together. So everybody this way, everybody this way. Well, that wouldn't move it. Like window wipers, that's just going to push it this way, push it that way, right? Some of you have got stuff on your window and you've tried with the windshield and it just goes back and forth, right? That's what would happen. Oh, this is awesome. Are you guys ready? I don't think you're ready. I was going to get you to do the wave. Can we try that? I'm serious. You start. And you'd see how hard it is. Have you been to a baseball game? And the people that don't participate, you boo, you don't like those people, right? Because they ruin it. And that's human beings. That's rational human beings who know how to work. How do these... Well, it turns out these guys actually use what's called metacronal rhythm. You don't seem impressed. Metacronal rhythm. That is the wave you see at a baseball game. And that's how these guys move down the fallopian tube. These cilia, whoa, they do that. And that's what sends the egg down. Now listen, if they didn't do that, if they didn't move in that perfect rhythm, then you would have potentially a fertilized egg sitting in the fallopian tube. What happens? If a fertilized egg gets stuck in the fallopian tube and it's not moving anywhere, you will have a tubal pregnancy, which is a medical emergency. Both mother and unborn child will die, okay? It grows inside the fallopian tube, it bursts, hemorrhage. And so you have a serious problem. And sadly, those things do happen. Now, so these guys are pushing. So listen, this is the end of life. If you don't get the cilia moving the fertilized egg down the fallopian tube, you're done. And listen, this is irreducible complexity at its finest, because if you can't do this, you can't reproduce. And evolution relies on reproduction. The definition of is differentiated reproduction. You have to get your offspring in the next generation. But if you can't produce offspring, that's it. That's extinction. It gets worse, though. So the egg and the sperm, they meet together. And this is a really cool miracle. You guys are going to like this, I think. You got to get the contents of the DNA from the sperm into the egg. Okay. So how are you going to do that? Well, so the egg, there's three barriers. The sperm comes up and it meets the outside. It meets the egg. But around the egg, there's this sticky stuff. It's called cumulus oophorus. Everybody say cumulus oophorus. Cumulus oophorus. I just like saying that. The cumulus oophorus, it secretes cells that secrete a sticky goop around the cell. Now this is really important because you know the cilia? They actually grab the sticky goop and push the cell down. Without the sticky goop, it doesn't move. You ever seen like at Marineland, the seal that has the ball on its nose and you can spin it? I don't know how he does it. But he can get the ball spinning on his nose. That's what happens. They've actually done tests on rabbits. They've taken the cumulus oophorus off the egg, put it in the fallopian tube, and it doesn't move. So you need the cumulus oophorus to get it to move, but we have a problem. The sperm cannot get through the cumulus oophorus. Or can it? Well, it turns out there's an enzyme in the sperm, a very highly specialized enzyme that actually digests the cumulus oophorus just outside. So all this stuff out here, the sperm's able to go through and digest all that material. Now, these are two separate cells from two different organisms. And yet when they come together for the first time, this one has the enzyme to get through this one. There we go. All right. I mean, I didn't design it, but you guys should be impressed. So that's the first thing. It gets through the cumulus oophorus, but there's another problem. Not only does it have to get through that, it has to get through the zona pellucida. That is this area here. Now, I made it red. It's the clear zone. Actually, zona pellucida actually means clear zone. But again, call it the clear zone. Nobody cares about that. The zona. To get through the zona, you need another enzyme, a very highly specific enzyme, and that enzyme eats through the shell here. It's not like a shell like a chicken egg, okay? These eggs have a shell that's kind of like Jell-O, okay? And it gets through the zona, and if the two come together and they're the same species, then the egg cell says, okay, send your DNA in here. And that's what happens. Now, there's still a big problem because once you get the DNA into the egg and it's fertilized, you have life, but you have all these other sperm trying to get in as well. And if one more sperm gets into that egg, it's the end of life. It's the end of life. And so what happens? Well, just in the inside of the cell membrane, just on the inside of the egg cell membrane, there's what's called cortical granules, and they just sit there on the end. And as soon as that sperm cell, penetrates the membrane, releases its DNA, all those things explode. And it releases these fine granules into the zona pellucida, and it hardens instantly. And all of the sperm that were fighting to get in there are frozen right where they are. They're locked in place. Is somebody impressed with that? I spent hours doing this. You guys are like, huh? Yeah, he is. This is the handiwork of God designing life. No one can explain this. This has to be just right. Like I said, you don't get another crack at it, okay? If you don't get this right, you don't reproduce. You don't leave offspring to the next generation for nature to select from. It has to be all in place. The enzymes have to be right. The cumulus has to be there. The cilia have to do their thing. All right. We're making good time. All right. Yeah, give God some credit here. Give God some credit. Okay. So let's look at some objections. I got 10 objections that you'll hear when you're talking with someone about the humanity of the unborn. So the first objection looks like this. The possibility of twinning means that the embryo can't be a human being. Now what twinning is when you have your zygote. The zygote divides into two cells. That's about the 30 hours. So between 12 hours and 24 hours after ovulation, which we talked about, you have the opportunity to have the egg fertilized. And if the egg is fertilized at that time, that single cell divides into two cells. If those two cells, because there's just a membrane around there, if they separate, not only do you have one, you had one human being, now you have two identical twins. Okay, that's how you get identical twins. Fraternal twins would be two eggs, okay, fertilized separately. So they say because of twinning, well, at the earliest stage, and this can happen up to 14 days, by the way, after fertilization. So they say up to those 14 days, we should be able to use these embryos for research, for stem cells, and so on. How do we respond to that? Well, there's a guy named Patrick Lee. He's a philosopher. He points out that just because one organism can split into two organisms, it doesn't follow that the original first organism wasn't a whole human, or wasn't a whole organism. And one way he describes this is he points to planaria. You guys know what planaria are? Oh, you got to take grade 9 science with me. What we do with these bad boys, they're called flatworms. And we did this a couple years back. What you do is you get those guys and you cut them in half. No one's sad. I guess it's a worm, right? If I cut a dog in half, you'd all be like, oh. Okay, I cut the worm in half. Now these guys have these stem cells inside them, and they can actually, there we go. If you cut them in half, the tail will grow a head, and the head will grow a tail. And so the question is, did I have a flatworm to begin with? Of course I did. Whether I cut it in half or not, I still had a flatworm to begin with. Likewise, it's still a human being, a whole human being, whether it twins or not. In fact, let me show you this. If you cut the head down this way, which we did in class, you can get a flatworm with two heads. In fact, there's a record, go on Google this, there's a record for how many times you can cut one of these worms and get all these tails and heads. Look it up. It's pretty cool. It's like 100 cuts or something. Yeah, that's cool, eh? The other argument that people have used is twinning is equivalent to cloning. I mean, we're not going to talk about cloning today, but cloning is twinning. I could take any cell on your body. Well, I couldn't, but someone could. Scientists could. Take that cell, and they could actually clone you using the DNA. And so if you can get an organism from a previous organism, would that mean I'm no longer a human being just because I could be cloned? No. Not to mention this twinning is quite rare. If you've met a twin, there's not many out there, so you should shake their hand and say, congratulations. Number 2, don't hide numbers of miscarriages prove that embryos aren't human. That comes up. You know, miscarriages happen, sadly, and so doesn't that prove that they're not really human beings? And I would ask, how does the fact that miscarriages are support the fact that embryos are not human? High infant mortality rates, like in the third world, which I have a graph up here for, make those children non-human? Just because there's high infant mortality rates, that is, more children are dying in those countries. Scott Klusendorf says this. He's the guy in Case for Life, which you got to get the book. He says, ask a brilliant question. He says, how does it follow that because nature may spontaneously abort an embryo, I may deliberately kill one? A journalist, Andrew Sullivan, he quips, just because earthquakes happen doesn't mean massacres are justified. Okay, just because it happens in nature doesn't mean it's moral, okay? Objection number 3, most women don't grieve a miscarriage like they would a child. Now, there's so many of these comments that come out, and you need to learn a 2-letter word that I find very effective when people say stuff like this. So, people will say things, and you need to be prepared to just say, so what? What follows from that? And likewise, in this case, most women don't grieve. I don't know if that's true or not. I have experienced a miscarriage with our first child, and I was torn up about it, okay? And so for someone to say, well, they just don't grieve, first of all, I don't know if that's true, but let's just assume it is. So what? What would that prove? How does whether or not someone grieves for you change what kind of being you are, right? If I died tonight, hope I don't. I hope I get to hold my baby tonight. But if I died tonight and no one was affected by it, not even my wife, she didn't care. I would think that she probably killed me if she didn't care. if she didn't care, that would not make me any less human, would it? And some absurd consequences happen. That would mean, are some humans more valuable or less valuable because more people grieve them or less people grieve them? Like Michael Jackson, millions of followers or whatever, when he died, does that make him more valuable because more people were broken over it? No, it doesn't work. Objection number 4. An embryo is no different than a somatic body cell. What they'll say is something like this. I've seen this in a debate. One of my buddies was debating a pro-choice advocate. And he's like, look, you're pro-life. All my cells here have DNA, human DNA. Look, is that mass genocide? Is that all these skin cells? Is that mass genocide? Now, this is a huge confusion. Now, my friend Jojo Ruba, he actually has a ministry in Calgary. He pointed out that you have just confused. This is a terrible mistake, terrible scientific mistake that you've made. You've confused parts with wholes, okay? All the cells on my body are parts of my body, okay? So a sperm cell, a skin cell, those are cells that are part of my body. But the embryo is a completely different, it's not a part of the body, it is itself a whole distinct organism. Okay, if you took a somatic cell, that is a body cell, and put that implanted in the uterus, it won't grow into a human being because it's just a part of the human being. It's not a whole. And so this is just a foolish thing to say. And there's much cruder ways that they put it, which I won't go through. Objection number 5. This is actually common. The burning research lab question. Suppose there's a fire in an IVF, an in vitro fertilization research lab, and you have to make a decision. This is how they'll put it to you. You got to make a decision between a newborn and a vial of embryos. Say there's 4 embryos. Who are you going to choose, pro-lifer? And what they want you to say is, I'm going to choose the newborn. And they're going to say, see, aha, you believe the newborn is human and not the embryos. Now listen, just because someone makes an inconsistent choice doesn't mean that the one is not human and the other is. For example, let's say there's a fire in this church, and I have a choice whether to save all of you or my daughter who's in the nursery. I'm sorry to say, I'm going for my daughter. You guys aren't going to like me now. I'm going to save my daughter, I'm sorry. And that might be the wrong decision in that case, but how does that affect your humanity? Does that mean you guys aren't human beings? No. So if I'm inconsistent or not, doesn't affect whether the embryos are human or not, okay? This is a very common, in the same debate, this was one of the objections that came up. The burning research lab question, okay? It has a lot of rhetorical force, but again, it doesn't work. Oh yeah, that's all you guys. I didn't have a picture of you. Okay, we're getting there. Number 6, embryos are just clumps of cells. How do you respond? They're just a clump of cells. What I normally do is I point at them and say, yeah, so are you. You're just a larger clump. It's not like a fat joke, it's just you're a larger clump. You have a clump of 100 trillion cells. A zygote has 1, or, and you get more and more and more as you go on there. The blastocyst has 100. Well, you have 100 trillion. What difference does it make? How many cells you have? You're just a bigger clump. This goes to another question, though. What's the difference between someone who's alive, so I should say 5 minutes before they die, alive, and 5 minutes after they die? Scientists ask these types of questions. What's the difference? Well, it turns out, as far as the cells go, there's not much. All those cells that were up here, moving my body and doing all that, and then if I were to die here, 5 minutes later, those cells would still be alive. And so a neurobiologist and anatomist at University of Utah shed some light on this question. She says that death occurs when the body ceases to act in a coordinated manner to support the continued healthy function of all bodily organs. It's not on the screen, sorry. Cellular life may continue for some time following the loss of this integrated bodily function, but once the ability to act in a coordinated manner is lost, life cannot be restored to a corpse, no matter how alive the cells composing the body may be. And so the question is an embryo like a corpse, like a clump of cells? Or is it something different? And the answer is, it is something different. In fact, the embryo, if you let it develop, works in a coordinated manner to fully develop from the embryo stage, which goes to week 8, 9, and then into the fetal stage, and then to the newborn, okay? And so because it has that coordinated manner, it's not just a clump of cells. You know what, I'm gonna save this one for when we talk next week. Some people talk about it only is a potential human. That's false. We know it's a human. The embryology textbooks tell us from the moment of conception, but they make a couple confusions. We'll talk about that later. I want to talk about this. An embryo is on its way to becoming human. This is a very common mistake that is made, so I want to make sure we highlight this. Many of the pro-choice or the pro-life arguments seem absurd to people because in the back of their minds, they believe that the unborn is constructed rather than developed, okay? So here's the analogy. I want to ask you, at what point does an automobile, a car, come into existence? Well, some of you might be thinking, probably when it gets the engine. You know, that's when it's a car, we can say for sure. Someone else might say, no, when it gets the wheels, that's when it comes into existence. But you know, we wouldn't be right or wrong. Someone in here might be thinking, until it gets those windshield wipers, that's not a car. Until it gets that sunroof. Some of you are spoiled. Until it gets that sunroof, it's not a real car. So you could have this idea, but that's thinking in terms of construction. Now, no one would see two panels at the very beginning welded together and say, that's a car, right? In the same way, they say, look at those two cells. That's not a human. It's just two cells. Just like that's two panels. Now, this is a confusion between constructed things and developed things. So here's the developed thing. This is the analogy. Very helpful. I got this from a young lady. Her name's Stephanie Gray. She's a part of the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. Okay, Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. She is awesome, and I think she might be in Toronto in the next little while. So if you see her speaking at a church or somewhere, you need to check that out. So she has this analogy, and it involves using a Polaroid camera. Now, if I show this to grade 7s, they think it's a printer. So if you're old enough to know what that is, you're old. No. That's a Polaroid camera. So suppose you and your friend are at Loch Ness. And what's Loch Ness famous for? The Loch Ness Monster. So let's also imagine that this is pre-digital age, and you have your Polaroid camera with you. Now imagine the Loch Ness Monster surfaces, and you got your camera ready, okay? And you see it surfaces just for a moment, and then it goes back under. But you got the evidence, you got the shot, you're so excited. Now your friend is in the boat with you, and they say, oh, I want to see that, let me see that thing. And so you pulls it out of the camera, starts looking at it, rips it up, throws it in the lake. You're shocked. It's like, that was the evidence everyone's been looking for. That's the Loch Ness Monster. Like, what are you talking about? That wasn't the Loch Ness Monster. That was just a bunch of brown smudges. What do you care about brown smudges for? And you say, no. In an instant, the whole image was captured. You just had to wait for it to develop. It was all there right from the beginning. In the same way, we got to be telling people, it's all there. The embryo, the zygote, as soon as fertilization takes place, all of it's there. We just have to wait for it to develop. It develops from within. It's not constructed from the outside like a car, where machines have to put this together, where this could be a plane or a car or something in between. We're talking about an embryo that develops from within, coordinates its own development. These are worlds apart, and this is one thing we need to be clear on when we're making distinctions with people. They might be thinking in terms of construction instead of development. All right, number 9. Listen, the acorn is, an acorn is not an oak in the same way an unborn is not a human being. Now, this confuses the stages of development with the human that's going through the stages of development, okay? So here you have an acorn, and then you have the sprout stage, and then the sapling stage, and then the tree stage. It's true an acorn is not a tree, just as an embryo is not a senior citizen. Those are different stages of development. They're both human beings, okay? So an acorn is not an oak tree, but an acorn certainly is an oak, okay? That's the kind of being it is. In the same way, you know, an embryo is not an adult human being, but it is a human being, okay? Number 10, last one. But the fetus doesn't look like a human being. How do you respond? The answer is actually, yes, it does look like a human being. It looks like a human being at that stage in development. Human fetuses look a certain way. Human teenagers look awkward and a certain way, right? You've seen them. Some of you have them. And so they look like that stage. They'll look at the fetus and say, what are you talking about? Look at this thing. That doesn't look like a human. That looks, I can tell you with certainty that that looks like the human fetus. Every human fetus has looked like that, okay? And that's my daughter, and she's really cute. Yeah, I know. All right, I got 5 minutes. I'm going to wrap up here. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about embryological development as well, just in the first 3 months. I'm just going to show some slides here. Like we said, that doesn't look like a human being, but it certainly is a human being at that stage in development. It doesn't look like an adult, I should say. It doesn't look like a newborn, but it looks like embryo at 3 and 4 weeks. Now, at 3 weeks, you have brains. They'll say, if you watch some of these videos online, they show Planned Parenthood. They'll have people go undercover to Planned Parenthood. This is the #1 abortion facility in the United States. 300,000 abortions a year just from Planned Parenthood alone. And this one girl, she's gone in numerous times to different abortion clinics, and she's asked scientific questions to the people who are working there. Says, so what? My baby is 3-4 weeks. What does it look like? And they'll say things like, oh, it's just a blob of cells. There's nothing really there. Those kinds of things. But what you should know is at 3 weeks, the brain has already started to develop. The spinal cord, the heart is developing. In fact, you can register a heartbeat at 3 weeks and 1 day, okay? Around 20 days in development, you have a heartbeat. 4 chambers of the heart are there at 4 weeks. When you go from 5 to 8 weeks, appearance of the cerebral hemisphere, it actually turns away in response to light. And they'll say things like, it doesn't feel pain, not till the 20th week. That's debatable. Fingers begin to form on the hand. Fingers are forming. Brain waves are measured in the 7th and 8th week. In fact, it's been recorded at 6.5 weeks, brain waves. The hands move, the neck turns, hiccups begin. 90% of the 4,500 body parts are now in place at 7 to 8 weeks. I know. People don't know this. This is not the kind of material that Planned Parenthood is going to share with the people coming through their door. Last slide. 9-10 weeks, jaw opens and closes, sighs and stretches, thumb sucking and swallowing fluid. Like this is at 9 to 10 weeks. Some women, they barely know they're pregnant when it comes to 8 weeks and later. Nose and lips are fully formed, complex facial expressions. The arms become now proportional to the body at 11 to 12 weeks. This is all in the first trimester. 90% of abortions take place in the first trimester. And they'll say, what are you guys complaining about? It's not like, it doesn't look like a newborn. But at the first trimester, in the first trimester, you can see all of these things. I've just put a couple of things here. You can actually go to the Endowment for Human Development. It's ehd.org, ehd.org, and you can see an incredible amount of information and pictures and videos of embryological development. It's quite amazing. I got some of these figures from there. So you know what? That's about it for the science. At this point, I think we've done well to defend the humanity of the unborn. That was the second premise. Remember, elective abortion kills an innocent human being. I think we've proven that it does kill an innocent human being. So what does the pro-choice advocate do? Well, they switch gears. They say, okay, it is a human being, I'll grant you that. Well, now I have to attack the first premise, that it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. That doesn't sound right. Who would want to attack that premise? But what they do is they say, it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human person. You can kill innocent human beings, just not innocent human persons. And what they've done is they've made a step from saying, okay, there's humans that are non-valuable, we can kill them. And then there's persons that we are valuable and we can't kill them. And I'm going to show you next week that there's no difference. In fact, this is just a shell game, okay? Using this personhood terminology is really just trying to change the subject. It's a distinction without a difference, okay? So that's what we're doing next week, and hopefully you come prepared. I'll close in prayer, though, before you get up. I got 1 minute to do that, all right? Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for this opportunity to come together. I just thank you that I didn't have to run out of here in a panic. So, God, we just give you all the praise for that. And Lord, I just ask that some of this material would be remembered and easily accessible to the people in this room who are sharing with loved ones and family and friends and strangers and everybody else about the unborn and the humanity of the unborn. And so, God, I pray that you would ignite a passion within all of us here to advocate for the unborn and change hearts and minds on this issue. We ask all this in your name. Amen.